Hey, hey, Disney fans, planners, and reluctant visitors. I'm Becky, and this is Touring Plans Teaches. We're on week 3 of our introduction to the Disney Cruise Line. We've already talked about ships and stateroom types, and this week we're doing something a little bit different. We're not going to see a lot of Becky on the screen this week. Instead, we're going to take a scroll through all of the deck plans for each of the Disney ships. What's the goal of this? I want you to get an idea of how the ships are laid out. First, so that you can get an idea of whether you like a specific layout better, maybe this impacts your choice of which ship you're going to sail. Second is so that when you get on the ship, not everything is foreign to you, you don't feel totally lost. And third, so that you can pick a stateroom in a location that's going to make sense for your travel style and your party. We're going to start off by looking at the Disney Magic. Now you're going to be able to look at all of these deck plans yourself on the Disney Cruise Line website, but when are you going to get to look at them with Becky as your guide? So that's what we're going to do today. Let's start with the Disney Magic, and we'll go from deck 1, which is the lowest deck on the ship, all the way up to the top deck, deck 11. And we're going to work our way forward to aft. So that's from the front of the ship all the way to the back of the ship. Then when we move on to the Wonder, things will be mostly the same, and then the Dream and the Fantasy will be similar to each other, and the Wish is different than everything else. So on the Magic, down on deck 1, there's very little that we're actually going to care about, or very little that we hope we're going to care about, because forward on deck 1 is where you're going to find the Health Center. Now you could go here if you get seasick, but this is also where you're going to come if you have other issues that could impact your cruise more. So if you need that, that is all the way forward on deck 1. Also on deck 1, you're going to find some tender lobbies. So as you go into various ports, if the ship isn't able to go all the way to a dock, those tender boats will come out and meet the ship, and that's where you'll board some of those boats. Also on deck 1, we have some staterooms. Some are outside. These will have portholes. Some are inside. Those don't have portholes. You're also able to see which staterooms connect because they have these funny little open arrows. That doesn't necessarily mean that if you book that room, you absolutely will be able to get into the next room unless you book it as a connecting stateroom on purpose. Then you can open those up. As we move back here, we have the midship elevator lobby. Those are always the most popular. And then deck 1 ends. There's a lot of crew space, other things back here. If we go all the way to the back, we'll see some other tender lobbies as well as the aft elevators. You're really not going to need to use those to go all the way to deck 1 unless you are getting off the boat. So we've made it all the way to the back of the ship on deck 1. Let's go up to deck 2 and see what's next. We'll fast forward back to the front of the ship. Deck 2 is going to be another deck that is mostly staterooms, and you'll see some of these are very different sizes based on where they're located on the ship, and we again have several inside staterooms as well towards the forward of the ship. We have the forward elevator lobby, and then lots of banks of staterooms. The midship lobby, more staterooms, all ocean view, and inside staterooms all the way back to that aft elevator lobby, and then even more staterooms toward the back of the boat, the aft. Now all of these staterooms look like they're created equal, roughly equal sizes, some different shapes, but as we go up to deck 3, we're going to see that they are not all created equal based on what they're below. So as you come and play with this tool on your own, you're going to want to flip back and forth between decks because you want to see what's directly above your room and directly below your room. So let's go back to the forward part of the ship and up to deck 3, and this is where we'll start seeing some of our differences. Forward on deck 3, we no longer have staterooms. These are going to be some of the busiest decks for activities during the day and in the evening. Forward on the Magic, we have 2 of the bars and lounges, O'Gill's Pub and Keys. O'Gill's Pub turns into the Snuggly Duckling on those Rapunzel days. Then we have Fathoms. You might find some family activities here during the day. Also sort of that lounge with more adult activities at night, as well as a gift shop all surrounding that forward elevator lobby. As we move further back, we have the lobby atrium, the port shopping deck, the port adventures desk, guest services. You're going to find all of this on deck 3. Behind that is Lumiere's, which is one of the 3 rotational restaurants. So again, this is going to be a place that's really loud during those main dinings. Ideally, you're not in your room during those main dining rotations, but something to be aware of, especially as they get ready and they clean up from those seatings every night. And then towards the aft of the ship, we have Promenade Lounge. It's another one where they have lots of activities during the day. And then in the back, we have Rapunzel's Royal Table. Again, one of these rotational dining places that's going to be really loud at night. So if you are a family with young kids that's doing main dining and then not doing entertainment, instead putting your kids straight to bed, you don't want to book any of those Deck 2 staterooms that are directly below Lumiere's or Rapunzel's Royal Table. You probably also want to pay attention to those bars and lounges and sort of the nightlife section of the ship forward on Deck 3 so that you're not below those late at night either. Let's go up to Deck 4 next and see what's up on Deck 4. On Deck 4, we have the Walt Disney Theater. Thankfully, you can't stay right below the Walt Disney Theater because that's where those nighttime entertainment areas are, so we're not going to have to worry about that. But it does show that if you're near those forward elevators, you're going to be close to that theater, so you're going to get quick access to those shows late at night. We have the Preludes Bar, as well as some more gift shops. Hooray, can't have enough of those. Closer to the middle of the ship, we have the Disney Vacation Club desk and Disney Vacation Planning. We have more of the atrium and those midship elevators. As we go further back, you can see the Vista Gallery, as well as the D Lounge, another lounge. They do a lot of cooking classes in the D Lounge. Shutters, which is where you can find your photos, a jewelry shop, and the aft elevator lobbies. And then all the way at the back, we have Animator's Palette. So that's our 3rd rotational restaurant on this ship. They're all on either Deck 3 or Deck 4. So those low decks are going to get you quick access to these restaurants at night. You'll also notice that along the side we have something called the walking and jogging track, and that actually goes all the way around Deck 4, and it's sort of on the outside of the ship. That's where you're going to find the ability to lay on loungers outside while people are walking past. You can play shuffleboard. Really cool place to hang out on the Magic. Next, we can go up to Deck 5. On Deck 5, we finally get back to having some staterooms. Once again, we have some inside staterooms, and these are configured a little bit differently. They're rotated compared to the rest that we've seen so far, as well as some ocean view staterooms. There's our forward elevators. The bonus of having a stateroom on Deck 5 is that you're really close to the kids' clubs. A negative of having a stateroom on Deck 5 is that you're really close to the kids' clubs. These tend to be rowdy places, lots of kids running down the hall to go get to the kids' club, but something to consider if you want that easy access, especially if you want your kids to be able to check themselves out and then go back to the room. So we have the Oceaneer Lab, which is technically for older kids, separated by the atrium from the Oceaneers Club, which is for those slightly younger kiddos. I say technically because it has this hallway and they're not really separated. Your kids can go back and forth. Then further towards the back of the ship, we have the It's a Small World nursery. If you've booked some nursery time, which you do have to pay for, that's all those kiddos under the age of 3. That's where you're going to check them in. And further back, even more, we have the Buena Vista Theater. This is where you're going to see things like movies while at sea. Then we've got our aft elevator lobby and a few more staterooms. So not a huge number of staterooms on Deck 5, but those that exist do have quick access to those kids' clubs and the movie theater, but that also means they come with a little bit of extra noise. Now we're going to go up to Deck 6, and we're going to get into some of these decks that just have a lot of staterooms. So starting in Deck 6, you can see here we have a bunch of inside staterooms, and some of them are even on this secondary hallway. If you want a room that's really sort of well insulated from any sound or light, this is your place. Book some of these 6,300 staterooms, those inside staterooms. Otherwise, we have some of these ocean view and veranda rooms. You're going to start getting some of your own private outdoor space. There's your midship elevators, Some more inside staterooms here along the middle, your aft elevators, all the way back to the ship. You can see that some of these staterooms are very much larger than others, and as you click on them, you can figure out what category they are, how much they're going to cost compared to other rooms. You also see very easily which rooms are handicapped accessible, which is nice to know at a glance. Gonna go up to deck 7. And once again, we've got plenty of staterooms, so most of these are going to be veranda staterooms as well as some inside staterooms. You can tell not all inside staterooms are created equal here. Poor 7009, you definitely don't want to get stuck in that one. Midship elevators, more staterooms, aft elevators, and more staterooms. Again, some really, really wonky stateroom shapes and sizes here, but that's good to see visually so that you know what you want to book. We're getting closer to the top of the ship now. So here on deck 8, we have the bridge. That's where they're going to pilot the ship from. And we have plenty more staterooms, and these are going to start being some of your fancier concierge level type of staterooms. You can see some very large ones here near the forward elevator lobby. And the two biggest and fanciest suites on the ship, the Walter E. Disney Suite and the Roy O. Disney Suite, right across the hall from each other here. So deck 8, lots of concierge rooms, plenty of space for you to spread out all along this 8th deck of the ship here. And once again, those really funny shaped ones at the back of the boat. When we get up to deck 9, we start having some more sort of guest services types of spaces. So keep in mind those deck 8 staterooms are right below this. So some of the noise may impact those room choices. At the forward of the ship, we have Senses Spa. This is where you're going to go for all those fancy spa services as well as fitness classes. We have the Rainforest Room, which is a very popular place. You can get day passes or cruise passes there. It's less expensive. You get places to hang out without really any real services. On top of that, you see the locker rooms. There's a hair salon in here as well. It's all right next to that forward elevator lobby. Behind that, you're actually going to now be outside. So starting on deck 9, we're on part of the top deck here of the Magic. You have the Quiet Cove adult pool. So this is only where adults are allowed to be, as well as some whirlpools. We go a little bit further back. Here's the edge where some of those teens can hang out. Signals Bar is up on deck 9, as well as Cove Cafe. This is where you're going to get your premium coffee drinks if you want them. And they also have the pastry window that you're allowed to get free pastries from. Those are all right around the midship elevator lobby. And as we go further back, this is sort of your main hangout area. Goofy's Family Pool. You have the big stage, Funnel Vision. That's where you can watch movies up on deck. We go further back. This is where your on-deck dining is. All of this quick service. Pinocchio's Pizzeria, the Duck Inn Diner. And as we keep going back, you'll see the Aqua Lab. This is where kids can play. The Nephew's Splash Zone. Again, that's a splash pad up on deck for them to be able to play in. Then you get back to the aft elevator lobby where you have Daisy's Delights. And behind that, you have the big buffet restaurant, which is Cabanas. Lots of seating back here. This also equals lots of noise. So keep that in mind as you're picking deck 8 staterooms that are all right below this deck. Figure out where you might like to be on that deck. As we go up to deck 10, things are going to start getting smaller because we've already hit sort of the really top deck, the widest part of the ship. Up on deck 10, we're above that pool deck, and so we have the Wide World of Sports on the Magic, where you can do some sporting activities. We also have the Bippity Boppity Boutique, so they do have those on board the Disney ships, so you can get your daughters and sons all made over and fancy for those meals, maybe those formal nights. This is also where we have our concierge deck. We have concierge outdoor seating, the concierge lounge, all on deck 10. Also in deck 10, we have the Vibe, which is right next to those midship elevators. This is also where you board the Aqueduct, which is that slide at sea. Then you have your radio station. This is important for how the ship is run, not for music of your choice. Further back, you have the twist and spout entrance. That's another slide in that kids area of the pool. And all the way at the back of the ship, we have Palo, where you can do your specialty dining on the Magic. One more deck to go, and that's deck 11. Not much to see here. That's because deck 11 is inside the funnel, so you're only going to have deck 11 in the funnel, otherwise it's all just air, and in the funnel is where you have most of that vibe club, and you access that through the midship elevators only. Now I'm going to quickly flip over to the Disney Wonder, because it's basically the exact same thing. And if we go all the way down to deck 3, for example, you're going to see it's the exact same layout. You're just going to have different names. So instead of O'Gill's, we have the Crown and Fin Pub, and we have Cadillac Lounge. And as we go back here, instead of Fathoms, we have Azure, etc. But it's the same layout. So as you go along picking staterooms, you can see on deck 3 we have Tritons instead of Lumieres. We have the French Quarter Lounge instead of Promenade Lounge. And we have Tiana's Place instead of Rapunzel's Royal Table. But the layout's the same, so it's going to have the same impact as we go down to deck 2 on what staterooms you're going to want to pick, how close you want to be to elevator lobbies, whether you want to be below one of those restaurants or lounges. Otherwise, the room layouts are the same, the room categories are the same, so we're not going to go deck by deck. You can use the deck by deck view of the Magic and just replace the restaurant and lounge names with the appropriate offerings on the Wonder. Next, we're going to look at the Disney Dream. So once again, the Dream and the Fantasy are going to have the same layout as each other. We're just going to see different names. We have 3 additional decks to get through this time because these, instead of going up to deck 11, go all the way up to deck 14. So let's start at the front of deck 1. Unlike the Magic and Wonder, we're not going to have any staterooms on deck 1 of these larger ships. But like the Magic and Wonder, forward of deck 1 is where you can find that health center. It's going to be a bit larger on these ships because you've got more passengers on these ships, so they need more room in case something spreads. But other than that, on deck 1, all you're going to find are those tender lobbies. Here are your forward tender lobbies, your midship tender lobbies, and your aft tender lobbies. You'll know which lobby is which based on the elevator bank that it's serviced by, so if you hear those announcements as you get into a port, you'll know which lobbies that you're able to use. Let's go back up to deck 2 where we start to get a little bit more excitement. Not much here in the forward of the ship, but now we start to get some of these inside staterooms, as well as those ocean view ones on deck 2. On deck 2, you're not going to get any verandas. You're too close to the water. You wouldn't be able to use that veranda anyway. Here at the forward of deck 2, you can see 2 inside staterooms that have a very different layout than the rest. Some people like this layout, some people don't, but make sure you research that before you book 2007 or 2507. As we move back, we see a couple additional interestingly shaped ones here in the inside of the ship near the midship elevators. And we also see on deck 2, we actually have some services here on the Dream, unlike it being all staterooms on the Magic and Wonder. We have Vista Gallery near the back, the aft of the ship, and we have the Enchanted Garden, which is one of the rotational restaurants here on the Dream. So you have some staterooms that are right up against that rotational restaurant. If you think you're going to be going to bed early, your kids are going to be napping in the middle of the day, really not a good option for you. And it's hard to know that unless you're actually looking at the deck plan. And now we can go up to deck 3. And once again, we're going to need to pay attention, flip back and forth between deck 3 and deck 2 when you're looking to book, because on the Dream and the Fantasy, the Walt Disney Theater, part of it is on deck 3. So those rooms on deck 2 that are below this theater are going to be pretty loud at night when these shows are running, also when they're doing rehearsals, as they're cleaning up at night and resetting for the next day. So that theater is forward on the ship. As we move closer towards midship, we have a bunch of the gift shops. And around those midship elevators, we have the big atrium, including guest services and Bon Voyage, which is one of the bars on the Dream. Between midship and aft on the ship, you have Royal Palace, another one of those big rotational restaurants. So you're going to have a lot of noise in this restaurant during those meal times especially. And as you go all the way to the back on deck 3, you have Animator's Palette. On the Dream and the Fantasy, you've got one of the rotational restaurants on deck 2. The other 2 are on deck 3. Next, we're going to move up to deck 4. Here we see the rest of that Walt Disney Theater. So in the Dream and the Fantasy, Walt Disney Theater spans 2 different decks. The balcony is on deck 4, and you can access it from deck 4. So if you want a little bit of a higher view and don't want to wait in the lines for the main floor seating, you can go up to deck 4 and wait there instead. You also have the Buena Vista Theater right by the Walt Disney Theater on these ships, and so that's where you're going to see your movies at sea. As we go back to the midship, we have things like our port shopping desk, Disney Vacation Planning. This is where Shutters is, where you can find your photos. We also have Vista Cafe, which is that secondary sort of coffee spot on these ships. We'll see Cove Cafe later as we get to the top of the ship. You have Tiffany & Co. on these ships, as well as the D Lounge. This is where you're going to be doing things like those cooking demonstrations. And then at the back of the ship is where we have the district, and this is where you sort of have that nightlife for this ship. So you have Pub 687, the District Lounge, Pink, Skyline. This is the one with sort of the virtual skylines. Evolution is the big lounge near the back of the ship. As we were scrolling past, you may have also noticed that, like on the Magic and Wonder, we have our walking and jogging track that goes all the way around the outside of the ship on deck 4. So you can jog there in the mornings, or you can do what I do and read a book in the loungers instead. We'll watch all those motivated people doing their jogging, or you can play shuffleboard and try not to lose those pucks at sea. Next, we'll go up to deck 5, and so some of these rooms are where you're going to want to be cognizant of what is below you. Some of these rooms are directly above that big Walt Disney Theater, and so you want to keep that in mind. At the front of deck 5 is where we have the Vibe on the Dream and the Fantasy. This is really different than it being in the funnel on the Magic and the Wonder, and it has its own exterior here, so those teens get their own part of the ship that is out in the sun. Notice that you have some staterooms that are right next to the Vibe. Might not be a great thing if you don't like those Midnight Ragers that they throw. I don't actually think they throw Midnight Ragers, but there is quite a bit of sound there. As we go back to the back, we see more balcony seating. So here we are close to midship. This is that movie theater. So once again, it covers 2 decks on the Dream and the Fantasy. And some of those staterooms are going to have some of that theater noise as those movies run most of the day and the night. We go back to midship. Here's where we have the Bippity Boppity Boutique on these ships, as well as the It's a Small World nursery. Very interesting layout here, but a really nice nursery. As you get closer to the back of deck 5 is where your kids clubs are again. So deck 5 on all 4 of these ships so far is where you're going to have your kids clubs. We have the Oceaneer Club and the Oceaneer Lab, and then some more staterooms near the aft of the ship. Once again, you're going to see some staterooms with really interesting layouts compared to some of the others, especially near the corners in the back and the front of the ship. So that's something to look at. Let's keep going up to deck 6 this time. Now we're in Stateroom City. So we're going to have staterooms just all over the place. You have a couple of inside staterooms here, but a lot of larger staterooms. You have some bump outs. You have some corner rooms. These are all things to look for as you're looking for specific staterooms that you may want to book. There's our forward elevator bank, our midship elevator bank, some of those larger rooms, especially the accessible ones, then just a bunch of similar sized staterooms until we get back to the aft of the ship. That's our aft elevator bank, some inside staterooms, and some staterooms with some really nice views off the back of the ship on deck 6. These deck 6 staterooms tend to be pretty well insulated from noise because we'll see deck 5 pretty quiet other than those kids clubs, and that noise isn't going to filter up as frequently. Kids do go to bed at some point, so that's a good thing, and deck 7 is going to really insulate it from noise as well. So let's look at deck 7. Very similar to deck 6, just packed to the gills with as many staterooms as we can get in there. Here we have 2 corner staterooms, so these have very interesting layouts, a lot more square footage than other staterooms that you'll see in this category, and they aren't handicap accessible. So you're not taking that room from someone that needs it, so those are interesting ones to book. We also have some more inside staterooms on this deck. There's our forward elevators. There are our midship elevators. A lot of these are veranda staterooms, and our aft elevator bank. Once again, some really interestingly shaped rooms here on the back of deck 7. You also have some ones that don't have those verandas as well. Now let's go up to deck 8. And we're starting to see why the Dream and the Fantasy holds so many more passengers than the Magic and Wonder. Magic and Wonder didn't have many of these stateroom-only decks, but we're seeing lots of them on the Dream and the Fantasy. So once again, you've got your corner rooms that aren't accessible, so lots of people able to book those, as well as your inside staterooms. There's our forward elevator, our midship elevators, more of those inside staterooms, and then our aft elevators, along with some very, very large staterooms at the back here. All right, we're going up to deck 9. Let's see if anyone has any guesses. What? You guessed staterooms? You're right. Congratulations. Gold stars for all of you. Here on deck 9, we have more staterooms. There's our forward elevator bank, our midship elevator bank, some really large rooms here on deck 9, really long at least. And then our aft elevator bank with the interestingly shaped rooms at the back. So you can see sort of these decks 6, 7, 8. Those are going to be well insulated from noise because you're having staterooms above, you're having staterooms mostly below. You're not going to have to contend with any of that noise from restaurants, from theaters, from pools, etc. Next, let's go up to deck 10. And here's where we see, oh yes, lots more staterooms. Here's our forward elevator bank. A few inside staterooms on this deck, not quite as many. Midship elevator bank. Some of those really long rooms again. That's how you're getting more square footage. And that aft elevator bank. Not as many interestingly shaped staterooms on deck 10. A couple of these L-shaped rooms if you think you can take advantage of that space. Now we're getting up to deck 11, where things are getting a little more interesting again. Here's our spa area on the Dream and Fantasy. Up near the front, you have the treatment salons. Your rainforest room is off to the side on the Dream and the Fantasy instead of sort of insulated in the center. A couple of couples villas, so you can book those, and they are private. You have your locker rooms, the fitness center. They do host classes there. There's a juice bar as part of Senses on the Dream and Fantasy, and they also have a salon. You have some staterooms that are right in this area. If you think you're going to be in that rainforest room or using the spa extensively, those are really convenient, and they tend to not have as much noise because the spa is a quiet place anyway, so they're a little insulated from that noise that you would otherwise expect from a busy part of the ship. But once again, now we're close to the outside of the ship. We're on sort of that pseudo top deck where we're going to start having our pools. Here near the Senses spa area is the Quiet Cove pool. This is that adults space, as well as the Cove Cafe where you can get your specialty coffee drinks. And then right behind that, so this is different than the Magic and Wonder, is where you're going to start doing some of your quick service. So there's not much in between the masses trying to get at chicken fingers versus your adult space here on the Dream and the Fantasy. You can also get your ice cream here on deck 11. Deck 11 is where we also have that funnel vision and the stage where you'll do some of those shows late at night like Pirates in the Caribbean. You have Donald's pool and Mickey's pool, so two sort of these main pools on the Dream and the Fantasy. Mickey's Slide, the kids area, which is Nemo's Reef. You got beverages. Here's Vanellope's Sweets and Treats. That's where you can get specialty ice cream on the Dream and Fantasy. Cabanas is interestingly shaped on the Dream and the Fantasy. Lots of panoramic ocean views as you wrap around here. Makes it a little harder to navigate and find your party if you're trying to meet up with them in cabanas on the Dream and the Fantasy. But you'll find cabanas on that deck 11 near the aft elevator bank. Next, we're going to go up to deck 12. Up on deck 12 is where we start having a lot of those concierge type rooms. You'll notice these very, very large looking wonderful rooms, as well as a little more more Senses Spa here on deck 12, and that's where you'll find your concierge lounge as well. As we go backwards on deck 12, there's the funnel puddle pool, so another pool on deck 12. There's our midship elevators. And deck 12 also has the aqueduct entrance. That's your slides, tube slide at sea. Waves bar is on deck 12, and then all the way at the back is our specialty dining once again. You have Palo, which is larger, Remy, which is smaller, and the Meridian Lounge in between the two. Two more decks and we'll finally have made it through the Dream and the Fantasy. Up near the front of the Dream and the Fantasy on deck 13 is Satellite Falls. This is also the concierge area. They have their own private sun deck on deck 13, and you can find Currents Bar on deck 13. Then we're in Funnel Land on deck 13 near Midship. That's where you can find the Edge. So on the Magic and Wonder, the vibe was in the funnel. Now we've got the Edge in the funnel on the Dream and the Fantasy, serviced by that one midship elevator that goes up all the way to deck 13. And in the back, we have Goofy's Sports Deck. Here you can find Goofy Golf. That's where you can do mini golf on board these ships. There's also sports simulators. You tend to have to book times at those separately, so check those out before your cruise. One more deck here on the Dream and the Fantasy, and once again, it's that funnel. But this time on the very top deck, that funnel is not dedicated to the Kids Club, it's dedicated to Outlook. This is where a lot of private events are hosted. Also maybe some public ones. You can check out the Navigator, and the radio studio is where they'll need some of those important radio things for the ship as well. We have one more ship to go, and that's the Disney Wish. The Disney Wish is very different than all of the other ships we've seen. The Dream and the Fantasy were similar, the Magic and the Wonder were similar, and we could even see some similarities between the two. If you sail on the Magic and then the Dream, nothing's going to seem incredibly different. But here on the Disney Wish, everything is different. The one thing that's not different is that you'll find tender lobbies and the health center down on deck 1, and both of those are near the forward elevator lobby. You'll notice many more actual elevators in this elevator lobby, and that's because on the Disney Wish, even though it is the largest ship in the Disney fleet, there are only 2 elevator lobbies, forward and aft. No more midship elevator lobby. Now those names are a little bit misleading. The forward elevator lobby is very forward, but the aft elevator lobby, if we're looking at this little diagram on the side, the aft elevator lobby is pretty well centered. So that's interesting to note. It's closer to midship than it is to aft, but there aren't any other elevators any further aft. So we're going to call it that aft elevator lobby. That's where you're going to get on those tenders. Nothing else on the first deck. Hopefully you don't need to use the first deck during your cruise. Up to deck 2 of the Disney Wish, and things are going to look a lot wider than on the other ships. You'll notice there's more stuff squeezed into each deck. So all the way forward here on deck 2, you have the Walt Disney Theater. We'll recognize that from some of the other ships. And then we have a lot of staterooms, and a lot of them are varied sizes. So we can see inside staterooms as small as 2557, looks very almost squarish. 2551 is bigger, more squarish, and then you have things like 2053, very long and rectangular. So having this visual can help you decide which of those might be the right choice for you, as well as these ocean view staterooms. Now, here's where things start to get different. Deck 2 on the other ships was always just staterooms, maybe a couple of other things, a restaurant at the back. Kids clubs were always on deck 5. That is no longer true on the Disney Wish. We start seeing some of these kids clubs here on deck 2. So this is all part of the Disney's Oceaneers Club. Remember, there's no Oceaneer Lab on the Disney Wish, and it breaks out all of the various rooms you can find as part of that Oceaneers Club on the Disney Wish, including that Superhero Academy, the Star Wars Cargo Bay, Fairy Tale Hall, the Hub, that's where you check them in, the Imagineering Lab, Mickey and Minnie's Captain's Deck, and then all the way at the back you'll find the It's a Small World nursery for those little kiddos. That's where you can check them in too. Near the aft of deck 2, all around that aft elevator lobby, we have lots more staterooms. So once again, these are going to be low on the ship. You're not going to have verandas, and they're near those kids clubs. That can be a good thing. That can be a bad thing. It all depends on your priorities. And all the way in the aft of deck 2, we really don't have anything. So we've already covered deck 1 and 2, and we don't have any dining yet. So that's another thing that's different here on the Wish. We'll go up to deck 3 and we'll see the continuation of that Walt Disney Theater, much larger on deck 3 than it was down on deck 2. All around the forward elevator lobby, we have a bunch of shops, as well as some of those sort of nightlife bars and lounges. Here we have the Bayou, Star Wars Hyperspace Lounge, and Nightingales. Those are very popular lounges here on the Wish. As we go backwards, we also have the Grand Hall and the Grand Hall stage, as well as the Oceaneer Club check-in. So that Oceaneer Club was down on deck 2, but the check-in's on deck 3, and that's because your kids are supposed to enter via a slide, I forget, magic tunnel, something that transports them down to the Oceaneers Club on deck 2. So this is the equivalent of the atrium on the other ships. This is the Grand Hall on the Wish. And now we have our first rotational dining restaurant, and that's 1923. You can see here it's actually 2 separate rooms on either side of the ship. 1923, the Walt Disney side, and the Roy Disney side. Depending on what table number you have, that'll determine which side of the restaurant you get seated on, and that's surrounding those aft elevators. Again, nothing near the rear of the ship on deck 3. Here on deck 4, we have the continuation of the Walt Disney Theater. This is where you'll have access the balcony for the Walt Disney Theater on the Disney Wish. And you have 2 movie theater rooms, the Wonderland Cinema and the Neverland Cinema. So those will have different schedules throughout your cruise. Then, as we go past those forward elevators, we have Luna Libations and Luna. This is where you can have some shows throughout the cruise, entertainment, as well as that bar. As we keep going backwards along the ship, we can look down into the Grand Hall. This is where our DVC desk is, our port adventure desk, and guest services. We keep going. We have a barber shop, also a salon, and the Bibbidi Boppidi Boutique. Those all make sense together, as well as the Wishing Star Cafe. Then we have our aft elevator lobby. And at the very back of the ship, we have Worlds of Marvel. This is the second of those rotational dining restaurants on the Wish. If we go back forward, you'll notice that we have something called the Shipside Promenade. On the other ships, this was called that walking and jogging track. It's no longer called that, and it's no longer called that for a reason. On the other ships, you could jog in a full circle around the ship on that deck 4, or you could be like me and read your book on a lounger instead. Here on the Wish, these promenades end. They do not go all the way around like they do on the other ships. Now you can get all the way around the ship outdoors, but you have to go over stairs. It's not as easy as it was on the other ships, and that's a pretty big complaint I hear from the walking and jogging community, which again, I'm not a part of myself, but I sympathize. Here at the front of deck 5 is where we have Senses Spa. So on all the other ships, deck 5 is the kids' deck. Here on the Disney Wish, deck 5 is the spa deck. We also have Pluto's Corner here, which is for all those canine companions on the ship. Lots of space for Senses Spa, as well as the fitness center on the Wish. Here's our shipside promenade, once again, on deck 5. So it's a little split up compared to the other ships. Right around the forward elevator lobby, we have more nightlife, including the Keg and Compass and Triton Lounge, as well as the balcony for Luna, which was down on deck 4. We can still see down into the Grand Hall. We have some shops up here on deck 5, as well as another cafe. Deck 5, near those aft elevator lobbies, is also where we're going to find the Edge on this ship. So it got kicked out of the funnel once again. Now it's on deck 5, where all the kids' clubs used to be. At the very back of deck 5 is where we have Arendelle. So this is the last of our 3 rotational dining restaurants on the Disney Wish. This is where you're going to get to see Olaf and Oaken and all your other frozen friends during your Disney Wish sailing. Deck 6. We're going to keep going up. Here's our shipside promenade up on deck 6. So far, if you're keeping track, if you want to jog around the ship, you've got to go on deck 4 and 5 and 6. That's a lot of flight of stairs if you're going to try to get quite a few miles or laps in. We're finally getting back to some staterooms now that we're on deck 6. We have some of those very forward in the ship. Just a few inside staterooms, lots of veranda staterooms here on deck 6. You can see these ones on the bump out are significantly larger than the ones that are not, so that's something to keep in mind. You will pay more for them generally because they're a slightly different category, one of those letter differences, typically speaking. We go all the way to the back and we have some of these fun-shaped rooms at the aft of the ship. This is going to be similar to the dream and the fantasy, where now we're going to have several decks that look remarkably similar to one another, and where all the people are packed like sardines into these decks in their staterooms on the Wish. So we'll start forward on deck 7. You have these fun corner rooms on either side of the forward part of the ship. You have some more inside staterooms of very different sizes, so that's something that you really should pay attention to if you're booking in that category. There's our forward elevators. And as we go back, we'll see our aft elevators. And then we'll notice on the Wish, due to only having those 2 elevator banks, we have a lot of staterooms here near the aft of the ship that don't really have an elevator bank anywhere close to them. So this is sort of, if you're a Disney theme park visitor, these rooms at the back of the ship will be very quiet because there's no elevator bank anywhere near them, and only the people that have to walk all the way back here are going to do it. But you do have a hike, so it's like if you're staying at Jambo and you're all the way at the end of one of those arms. That's what these rooms are going to feel like after a night up on the top deck. Deck 8 is going to look very similar, so I'm going to sort of speed through it. We have the cool corner rooms up at the forward part of the ship, lots of veranda rooms. We have laundry available on deck 8 near those forward elevators. And then as we go back, there's our aft elevators, and then the long, lonely walk all the way to the back of the ship. These staterooms at the back, although they have a long walk, do have a lovely view off the back of the ship. And rather large verandas, so I guess you're rewarded. Rewarded for your patience and your perseverance. Here we are on deck 9. Similar layout, except we no longer have those staterooms on the very forward part of the ship. Forward elevators, some inside staterooms packed in there, aft elevators, and our long walk back to the aft of the ship. Deck 10, we're making our way up and over. So here we go at the forward of the ship. Lots of very similarly sized rooms near the forward part of deck 10. There's our forward elevator lobby. Continuing back, our aft elevator lobby, some more inside staterooms, and the long walk to the back of that ship. That poor lonely inside stateroom here on deck 10 with the long walk. I would not book 10169, even if I was booking an inside stateroom. Up on deck 11, we start seeing those forward staterooms again that have the more interesting shapes. You also see some inside staterooms with their own interesting shapes, and how are you going to make use of that space? I don't know, but they might be something you want to avoid or you want to check out. There are our forward elevators, and now we're outside again on the pool deck. So near the forward part of deck 11 is where you'll have the Festival of Foods. This is your quick service on the pool deck. Best quick service on any of the Disney ships, as well as the Lookout Lounge and your funnel vision. The Disney Wishes pools are very different than any of the other ships as well. They're smaller and there are more of them. So the Mickey pool is near that funnel vision where you'll be able to watch movies and shows on the big screen. Then you have several other pools, the Minnie pool, Daisy pool, and Pluto pool, closer to those aft elevators. It's where you can also find the Joyful Suites. Those are an upcharge and some shopping. Then in the back is the Wishes equivalent of Cabanas. It's the only ship where it's not called Cabanas, and here it's Marceline Market. I live in Missouri, and I've been to Marceline, so I'm pretty excited. I might have to go try this market sometime. All right, we're going to go up to deck 12, and this is where you'll find your concierge rooms on the Disney Wish, as well as your concierge lounge. I shouldn't say all of your concierge rooms. There are some others that we will see as we go through these decks, but a lot of your concierge rooms are here on deck 12. Also on deck 12, we have more pools and places to play. So we have Trixie's Falls, the Toy Story Splash Zone. This is where your kids, especially those little ones, are going to play. And the Slidosaurus Rex, which may be my favorite feature of the Disney Wish as a whole. If you haven't seen Partysaurus Rex, you are missing out. Then we have more pools. So on a totally different deck, you have Donald's pool and Goofy's pool. So lots and lots of those tiny pools. Then your aft elevator lobby is where we finally have the Vibe and the Hideaway, as well as the Hero Zone. You have the Rose, which is another lounge, and Enchanté and Palo, which are your two specialty dining options here on the Wish. So we don't have Remy on the Wish, we have Palo, and we have Enchanté. Deck 13, 2 decks left, and so we know we're getting close to the end here. Here are some more of our concierge rooms, as well as that private sun deck for the concierge rooms and the concierge lounge and pool, just in case there weren't enough pools yet. Here's one that you have to be fancy to access. We have a couple of our royal suites on deck 13, Aurora and Briar Rose. I guess don't get confused and go to the wrong one. And all of those concierge rooms are near the forward elevator lobby. As we go back, we have the adults-only sun deck, as well as the adults-only whirlpool, the Quiet Cove. We also have the Aqua Mouse, which is sort of the ride at sea here on the Disney Wish, and more of the Hero Zone, and we'll finally find our Cove Cafe on the Disney Wish, where you can get those specialty coffee drinks, as well as the Quiet Cove pool, another pool, hooray, and the Cove Bar. Finally, we have deck 14. On deck 14, guess what you're going to find? Another pool, as well as the top stories of those Aurora and Briar Rose Royal Suites. Those are 2-deck staterooms. You have Currents Bar on deck 14. And then finally on deck 14, we have the Wish Tower Suite. This is the most expensive and fanciest of any of the staterooms on any Disney Cruise Line ship. You're going to be paying just unfathomable amounts of money to stay here, but you do get to stay in the funnel and have those fantastic views out of the funnel, and that's a pretty cool thing to claim. So we've finally made it to the end of all of our Disney ships here with the Wish. Thanks for sticking with me through all of those deck plans. I know that was a lot. Next week, we're going to be back, and we're going to be talking about special events on Disney cruises. These are things like Halloween on the High Seas, the Very Maritime cruises, as well as special events like Marvel Day at Sea, Pixar Day at Sea. This way you can understand if you want to book one of these specific special event cruises. We'll see you next week.